Hello and welcome, dear listeners and readers. Today, we're diving into a tale of forbidden love, resilience, and breaking free from the chains of expectation. Imagine a world where wealth and privilege are a gilded cage, and the only key to freedom is love. Stay with us because this story will captivate your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. The early morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Adira estate, bathing the breakfast room in golden hues. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the light like a polished mirror, and the hand-carved chairs, upholstered in fine Italian leather, stood like sentinels around the long dining table. The house was grand, yes, but to Adira Adewale, it felt more like a beautifully constructed prison. She sat at the far end of the table, absently pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate. Across from her, Fola Adewale, her father, sipped his coffee while skimming financial reports on his tablet. Even in his 60s, he was a commanding figure, his sharp gaze cutting through every obstacle in his path. His tailored navy suit, despite being worn at breakfast, hinted at a man who believed life had no time for rest. "You haven't touched your food," Fola said without looking up, his voice calm but expectant. "I'm not hungry," Adira replied flatly. Fola finally set down the tablet and fixed her with his calculating gaze. "Adira, you need to take these meetings seriously. The men I've arranged for you to meet are exceptional, wealthy, accomplished, and capable of protecting you." Adira sighed audibly and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I don't need protection, Dad. I need something real." Fola's expression hardened, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Real? What's more real than securing your future? This isn't a fairy tale, Adira. Love is a luxury, not a necessity." Her frustration boiled over. "Is that what you and Mom had? A calculated partnership?" For the first time, her father's mask cracked, a flicker of grief crossing his face. "Your mother understood the world we live in. She knew what was required." "And look how that turned out," Adira muttered, though she immediately regretted it. Her mother's death in a car accident over 2 decades ago was a wound neither of them had fully healed. Fola's voice sharpened. "Enough. You will meet these men, and you will give them a chance. I've worked too hard to see you squander your future on some naive ideal." Adira stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "You're right, Dad. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a cage." She left the room without waiting for a response, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. As she passed the grand foyer and the sprawling staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling that every glittering chandelier and gilded mirror was mocking her. That evening, her father's staff had arranged yet another dinner, this time with Samuel, the son of a prominent oil magnate. The restaurant was breathtaking, with its crystal chandeliers and tables adorned with fine china and flickering candles. Adira wore a fitted emerald green dress, her dark hair cascading down her back. Outwardly, she looked poised and regal, but inside she felt hollow. Samuel was charming, too charming. His perfect smile never faltered as he talked at length about his investments and subtly dropped hints about his admiration for the Adewale Empire. "So," Samuel said, leaning forward slightly, "what do you do for fun, Adira?" Adira sipped her wine, her patience wearing thin. "I read, paint sometimes, and I avoid dinners like this." Samuel laughed as though she'd made a joke. "You're funny. I like that." Adira forced a smile, excused herself to the restroom, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Behind the flawless makeup and designer dress, she barely recognized herself. She felt like a mannequin. Beautiful, yes, but lifeless, posed for someone else's benefit. By the time she returned to the table and endured the remainder of the evening, a growing sense of despair weighed heavily on her. When she finally arrived home, she tossed her purse on the couch and collapsed into bed, wondering if this was all life had to offer her. The first time Adira met Darius, she was pacing in the estate's grand foyer, her phone pressed to her ear as she argued with her assistant about an upcoming charity gala. "I don't care what the venue says," she snapped into the phone. "They promised a capacity of 500, and I expect them to deliver. Figure it out." She ended the call with a huff and turned, nearly colliding with a tall, broad-shouldered man standing silently near the doorway. He stepped back quickly, his expression calm and unreadable. "Who are you?" Adira asked, her tone sharper than intended. "Darius Ikenna, ma'am, your new bodyguard," he replied, his voice deep and steady. She raised an eyebrow, scrutinizing him. "Another one? What happened to the last guy?" "He was reassigned," Darius replied simply. "Right," Adira muttered, brushing past him. "Well, don't get in my way." Darius watched her retreat up the sweeping staircase, his face betraying no reaction. He was used to being dismissed, but as he stood in the opulent foyer, he couldn't help but wonder about the woman who carried herself with such fiery defiance despite the gilded world around her. Over the next few weeks, Darius shadowed Adira through charity events, business meetings, and social gatherings. He was a silent presence, always a few steps behind, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. Adira barely acknowledged him, treating him as another accessory to her father's well-oiled machine. That changed one rainy evening. Adira had just returned home from another disastrous date, her emerald gown now slightly damp from the sudden downpour. She stormed into the house, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floors, and threw her purse onto a chair. Darius stood near the entrance, his posture relaxed but alert. She turned to him, her frustration spilling over. "You don't have to stand there like a statue," she said without looking at him. "Would you like me to leave, Miss Adderwale?" he asked evenly. Adira hesitated, then sighed. "No, stay." For a moment neither spoke. Then, surprising even herself, Adira broke the silence. "Why do you do it?" Darius tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" "Work for people like my father, people who treat you like a tool." Darius didn't respond immediately. "Everyone has their reasons. Mine aren't complicated." "And what are they?" "To protect," he said simply. Adira studied him, her frustration giving way to curiosity. There was something about his quiet confidence that unsettled her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Finally, she said, "Well, good luck with that. Protecting me is a full-time job." A ghost of a smile flickered across Darius's face. "I'll keep that in mind." Darius's steadfast presence began to chip away at Adira's indifference. He was there when she needed an umbrella during an unexpected downpour, when she lost her temper during a board meeting, and when her father's plans became too overwhelming. Slowly but surely, she began to trust him, not just as her bodyguard, but as someone who truly saw her. And for Darius, the lines between duty and something deeper began to blur. The days turned into weeks, and Darius's presence became a constant in Adira's life. While she still bristled at her father's overbearing need to assign her a bodyguard, she couldn't deny that Darius's quiet vigilance made her feel a security she hadn't realized she needed. Darius was not like the others who had come before him. Where they had been talkative or eager to curry favor, Darius was calm, professional, and almost unnervingly observant. Adira began to notice the small things about him, how he positioned himself near exits, his eyes constantly scanning the room, or how he always seemed to know when she wanted space and when she needed someone nearby. It was as though he had learned to anticipate her unspoken needs. One evening, after an exhausting charity gala, Adira, walked into her room, and collapsed onto her bed without bothering to remove her shoes. The event had been another performance, another round of smiling and nodding while potential suitors and their mothers evaluated her like a prize mare. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the staff. To her surprise, it was Darius. He stood in the doorway, holding a tray with a glass of water and a small plate of fruit. "I noticed you didn't eat much at the gala," he said, his voice low. Adira sat up, startled. "That's thoughtful of you." Darius placed the tray on her nightstand and moved to leave, but she stopped him. "Wait." He turned, his expression unreadable. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You're here to protect me, not to fuss over whether I've eaten." Darius hesitated before answering. "It's part of the job." "No, it's not," she countered. "Most people in your position wouldn't bother." For the first time, Darius's composure faltered slightly. "Let's just say I know what it's like to go unnoticed." His words struck a chord. Adira stared at him, momentarily at a loss for how to respond. For the first time, she wondered about the man behind the uniform. What kind of life had he lived? What had shaped the quiet strength he exuded? Their bond deepened when Adira received devastating news one afternoon. Her closest friend, Tamara, had been caught selling private details about her to the tabloids. Personal struggles, embarrassing moments, and outright fabrications were splashed across every gossip website. Adira felt humiliated and betrayed. She locked herself in her room, refusing to see anyone. Hours passed before there was a knock at her door. "Go away," she called, her voice raw from crying. "It's me," Darius said gently. She hesitated before unlocking the door. When she opened it, she stood there in her pajamas, her face streaked with tears, clutching a tissue. "I don't know why I keep trusting people," she said, her voice breaking. "All they do is hurt me." Darius didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He led her to the couch and sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "People are complicated," he said after a moment. "Some will disappoint you, but not everyone." Adira laughed bitterly. "And who am I supposed to trust? My father? The men he throws at me? They all see me as a commodity." "Not everyone," Darius said quietly, his voice steady. His words hung in the air, carrying an unspoken weight. Adira glanced at him, her tears subsiding. For the first time, she didn't see just a bodyguard. She saw someone who genuinely cared for her, someone who, despite the vast divide in their social standing, treated her like a person. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, and they sat in silence. In that moment, a fragile but undeniable connection was forged between them. Fola Adewale was a man who prided himself on his ability to control the world around him. It was how he had built his empire, through careful planning and relentless determination. But as he observed the subtle changes in his daughter, the lingering glances she exchanged with Darius, and the way her usual sharpness softened in his presence, he felt a sense of unease. One evening, he summoned Darius to his study. The room was dark and imposing, the walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books, and the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and expensive whiskey. Fola sat behind his massive oak desk, his expression unreadable. "Darius," he began, gesturing for him to sit, "you've done an excellent job protecting my daughter." "Thank you, sir," Darius replied, sitting stiffly. "But I've noticed something troubling," Fola continued, his voice sharpening. "You're getting too close." Darius's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "My daughter is young, impressionable. She doesn't need distractions, especially not from someone who isn't part of her world." "With respect, sir," Darius said evenly, "I've never overstepped my role." "Perhaps not intentionally," Fuller said, leaning forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Darius. "But I've seen the way she looks at you, and the way you look at her." Darius remained silent, his fists clenching beneath the desk. "I'm offering you a way out," Fuller said, his tone deceptively calm. "Leave now, and I'll make sure you and your family are taken care of. A generous sum, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life." The offer hit Darius like a punch to the gut. For a brief moment, he thought of his mother, who struggled with medical bills, and his younger sister, who dreamed of attending university. The money could solve so many problems. But then he thought of Adira, her laughter, her fire, the trust she had placed in him. The thought of betraying that trust was unbearable. "No," Darius said finally, his voice steady. "I won't take your money." Fuller's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you still here?" Darius hesitated. "Because I care about her. But you're right. She deserves someone who can stand beside her, not in her shadow." Fuller studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Then do what's best for her. Walk away." That night, Darius packed his things. He left a note on Adira's nightstand. "I'm sorry, this is for the best." Then, without saying goodbye, he disappeared into the night. Adira woke the next morning to find the note. The moment she read it, her heart sank. She searched the estate, calling his name, but he was gone. When she confronted her father, he admitted to orchestrating Darius's departure. "How could you do this?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I did what was necessary," Fuller said coldly. "He wasn't right for you, Adira. You need someone who can match your station." "You don't understand anything," she screamed. "You think you can control my life, but all you do is push people away." Her words struck deeper than she intended. For the first time, Fuller saw not just his daughter, but a woman desperate to take control of her own destiny. But it was too late. Darius was gone, and Adira's heartbreak was undeniable. Darius had returned to his small hometown, a modest coastal village far removed from the opulence of the Adewale estate. The sea air was salty, the streets lined with small shops and houses with peeling paint. Here, life was quiet, unassuming, the opposite of the world he had left behind. Darius took a job at a private security firm, his days filled with patrolling quiet neighborhoods and overseeing small-town events. But no matter how simple life became, he couldn't escape the memories of Adira. Her laugh, her fire, her vulnerability, they haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, standing at the edge of her gilded world, reaching for something real. And he had left her. At night, he sat alone on the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, trying to convince himself he had done the right thing. She deserved better, he told himself over and over again, someone who could give her the life she deserved. Yet, despite his resolve, the ache in his chest never faded. For Adira, the days following Darius's departure were a blur of anger and grief. She threw herself into her work, expanding her efforts at the Adewale Foundation. Her team began to notice her relentless energy, her refusal to take breaks, her need to be everywhere at once. But no matter how much she poured into the foundation's projects, she couldn't fill the void Darius had left behind. Her relationship with her father, already strained, became almost non-existent. She spoke to him only when absolutely necessary, refusing to sit in the same room for more than a few minutes. One evening, she found herself in the garden, the place she went when the weight of the estate became too much to bear. She clutched the note Darius had left her, its edges frayed from being read and reread. "I'm sorry, this is for the best." "For who?" she whispered into the quiet night, tears streaming down her face. "Because it wasn't for me." 3 months passed before Adira decided she couldn't live with the unanswered questions. She had tried to move on, tried to bury herself in work and forget about Darius. But the longing remained. She needed closure, if not for love, then for her own peace of mind. Using her father's extensive connections, a resource she reluctantly tapped into, she tracked Darius to the small security firm where he now worked. The office was modest, tucked between a hardware store and a bakery. Adira stepped inside, her presence commanding yet out of place in such a humble setting. The receptionist, a young woman with bright eyes, looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Darius," Adira said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The receptionist hesitated. "He's out on a call right now, but he should be back soon. You're welcome to wait." Adira sat in the small waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stared at the clock, each tick stretching endlessly. Finally, the door opened and Darius stepped inside. For a moment, time froze. Darius stopped in his tracks, his expression a mixture of shock, relief, and something deeper. "Adira," he said softly, as though speaking her name might shatter the fragile reality of her presence. "Why did you leave me?" she demanded, rising to her feet. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was unwavering. "Why didn't you even say goodbye?" Darius sighed, running a hand over his face. "You know why. Your father—" "My father doesn't control my life," she interrupted, "and he doesn't control my heart." Darius's eyes met hers, and she saw the pain he had carried since he left. "I thought I was doing what was best for you. I'm just me. I don't belong in your world." "You belong in my world because I say you do," she said fiercely. "Don't you understand? It doesn't matter to me where you come from or how much money you have. I don't care about any of that. I care about you." Darius stared at her, the walls he had built around himself beginning to crumble. "You deserve more, Adira, more than I could ever give you." "You're wrong," she said, stepping closer. "You've already given me more than anyone else ever has. You've been there for me when no one else was. You've seen me for who I am, not who people expect me to be. That's all I've ever wanted." For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Finally Darius spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Adira. I always have, but I was afraid." "So was I," she admitted, tears in her eyes. "But I'm not afraid anymore." Darius reached for her, his hand brushing against hers. "Are you sure about this?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything," she said. When Adira and Darius returned to Lagos together, they braced for the challenges they knew lay ahead. Her father's initial reaction was predictably cold, but Adira stood her ground. "I love him, Dad," she said firmly. "And if you can't accept that, then I'm sorry. But this is my choice." Fola Adewale stared at his daughter, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own regrets. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "If he makes you happy, then I'll try to accept it." It wasn't an enthusiastic blessing, but it was enough for Adira and Darius to begin building their life together. They chose to live simply, in a modest home away from the spotlight. Adira continued her philanthropic work, expanding the foundation's reach to underserved communities. Darius started his own security consulting business, using his experience to help those in need. Their life wasn't without its struggles. Adapting to their vastly different backgrounds took patience and compromise. But every challenge they faced only strengthened their bond. They built a life defined not by wealth or status, but by love, trust, and the freedom to be themselves. Years later, Fola Adewale sat in the garden of the Adewale estate, watching his grandchildren play. Adira and Darius stood nearby, laughing as their youngest daughter tried to chase her older brother. Fola reflected on the choices that had brought them to this moment. He had once believed that money and power were the only ways to protect his daughter. But watching her now, happy and free, he realized how wrong he had been. In the end, it wasn't the wealth or the legacy that mattered. It was the love they had found in the unlikeliest of places, a love strong enough to bridge worlds and defy expectations. Adira and Darius had carved out a life beneath the shadows of wealth. And in doing so, they had discovered something far more valuable, a future built on love, resilience, and freedom. And there you have it, the story of love that defied expectations, a bond forged in the shadows of wealth, but illuminated by trust, courage, and resilience. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. Until next time, remember, true love isn't about where you come from, but where your heart leads you. Stay inspired, and we'll see you again soon.